Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank Steve Roth for joining us, and he is going to tell us about our speaker today. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, April. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. It's our first meeting of 2022. Off to an interesting start to the new year, and I wish everyone all the best in 2022. I'm also very happy to announce that BWC safety consultants, ergonomic consultants, and industrial hygienists are back in the field. If you have health and safety concerns that are going to be best addressed with an on-site consultation, feel free to give us a call. We're happy to schedule a meeting and come out and work with you to help solve those health and safety concerns you may have. Mark your calendars to join us for the fully online virtual 92nd annual Ohio Safety Congress and Expo. So this is going to be on March 9th and 10th, 2022. The Ohio Safety Congress will feature over 40 live broadcasts and on-demand sessions to help you achieve success in business strategies, innovation and technology, governance and compliance, and workers' compensation. Registration is free and now open at ohiosafetycongress.com. The 2021-22 edition of the Safety Services Catalog is now available for download. The catalog contains the links to detailed descriptions of all the safety-related courses and offerings and the safety-related videos in our library. Please visit bwc.ohio.gov to download the latest Safety Services Catalog. We have a full month left of safety distance learning opportunities from BWC. We have 2 webinars yet this month. On January 20th, we're going to have Record Keeping 101. This is record keeping for the safety or HR newbie. So that's January 20th. This is about filling out your OSHA logs. And then on January 25th, we have a webinar titled Workers' Compensation and How Safety Affects Small Business Profitability. So that's January 25th. Upcoming safety training classes. So these are half day or a little bit longer training classes. On January 19th and 20th, this is a full day class run over 2 days. We have crane rigging and signal person duties. And then on January 24th, we're going to start this HAZWOP, or the Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response Series. And so for those who may be familiar, the HAZWOP is a 40-hour course. So we're going to deliver this over, I think, 8 or 9 sessions. So the first session is going to be on January 24th, and it's going to be the Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response Series, Module 1. It's going to cover the regulatory background for EPA, DOT, and OSHA. And then let's see, the second session on that is going to be on January 31st, and that'll cover chemical and toxicology terminology. So that if you're interested in that HAZWOP certification, we're going to start this series. It's a big commitment. I think it's 8 or 9 different sessions over the course of probably 2 or 3 months. And then our last other course we have this month is a full half-day course on OSHA record keeping. So this is a half-day class that looks at a lot of the details and nuances of the OSHA record keeping rule, and that's going to be on January 27th. If you're interested in attending any of these classes or the webinars, you can do so by registering at bwclearningcenter.com. All right, that's the BWC announcements for this month. So let me move on to the next thing, why we're all here today. Our speaker this morning is William D. Neitzke. He is the Director of Safety at the 88th Air Base Wing at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The base is one of the largest, most diverse, and organizationally complex bases in the Air Force. It is home to more than 31,000 employees and is the largest single-site employer in the state of Ohio, with a $5 billion annual economic impact. Mr. Neitzke was commissioned through the Air Force Academy in 1990. He served as an aircraft maintenance and munitions officer until returning to flight duties in 1994. He held the rating of command pilot and served as an instructor pilot for both the United States Air Force and the Iraqi Air Force as an air advisor. Mr. Neitzke retired as a lieutenant colonel in 2014 and accepted his current civil service position thereafter. Please join me in welcoming William Neitzke.
Good morning. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that great introduction, and I appreciate the Chamber offering me the opportunity to come and talk with the Safety Council. Some of you may have met me before. I know that I've been to several of the Safety Council meetings and also a handful of Chamber meetings, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to come and speak. We'll talk this morning a little bit safety maybe from a different perspective as we go through this. Just some things to maybe think about to help you with how you approach safety, how you approach risk management, and things of that nature. And we're going to do it based on using some of my experiences as a background. We'll give an overview of a little bit about how I think, why I think that way, and then talk through some specific examples, if that makes sense. And you know, as we get through, if folks have questions, I am happy to try and answer them as best I can. All right, so this is not an Air Force official position, right? This is Bill coming to talk to you about my perspective on safety. The Air Force experience that I've had shapes a lot of that, but I also have a variety of experiences with businesses downtown in different areas that will feed into this. So this is my personal opinion, my personal views about safety programs. So who am I and why am I here? And I give a lot of safety briefings. I brief a lot of new commanders, I brief a lot of new employees. And one of the things I start with is I'm going to talk about myself not because I'm important, but because my perspective and how I think about safety is. It shapes how we do business. And I kind of want you to keep that in mind as you look at how you approach safety, right? I don't know the exact makeup of the crowd, but I'm going to guess there are some safety professionals in the crowd, and then there may be some leaders and managers. And those folks honestly approach safety slightly differently. So some things about me, some pictures there, just to give you some overview, right? I was an aircraft and munitions maintenance officer. I was a pilot. I was a staff officer, a safety officer. And in the Air Force, safety is a full-time profession on the enlisted side, and there are full-time safety professionals on the civilian side. There are not for officers. It is an additional duty for an officer because it's considered a leadership and management position for officers. So they don't get the same sort of safety background and in-depth training in safety that maybe the enlisted side or the civilians get. That's going to be an important thing to remember. I'm a mishap investigator. That's how I got into this. I was actually an aircraft accident investigator when I was a pilot. That's how I came into safety. Operations officer, right? Leadership and management, an air advisor. If you ever want to really learn safety, try and teach it to a foreign partner, right? I was asked once to gather up a team and go to Zambia and help their Air Force with their safety program. That really puts some things into perspective, and we will talk a little bit more about things like that as we go through this briefing. I'm an instructor. I teach safety, but that was not the first thing I learned to teach. I learned to teach people how to fly airplanes. And if safety isn't embedded in your mindset when you're teaching people how to fly big combat aircraft, you're probably not going to be terribly successful. So I'm not your typical safety officer, right? I look at things slightly differently. I look at risk. I do look at processes because that's part of my job now, but really I look at risk and I look at mission accomplishment. And we're going to talk about how you can do that within your own corporation a little bit. And this is me standing in a building that you notice is not in the best shape. We may have encouraged it to be not in very good shape during a war. My office was in that building for several months, all right? So that's a different mindset, and it had to do with the mission we were accomplishing and why it was. And my approach to safety may be different than many of you are used to, right? That's what I did for a living for a long time in those pictures. I refueled other airplanes in flight, in all kinds of weather, in all kinds of environments. When you're doing a job like that, when you are maintaining, right? I was an aircraft maintenance officer and a munitions maintenance officer. When you're supervising people that maintain high-yield weapons for the Air Force, right, safety becomes a core of what you do, even if you're not a safety professional. So I'm going to bring that mindset to this conversation, and I hope that it makes sense as we go forward. So here's what many safety people see as they go forward, right? and you're familiar with this. There are rules, there are checklists, there are procedures, there are programs, right? Fall protection, hazardous energy control. I just heard them announce that some great training programs are being offered through the Safety Council, right? Cranes and rigging and things like that. And those are extremely important because they are dangerous operations, right? And it's all very regimented. It's out of the Code of Federal Regulations in many cases. Fire extinguishers, emergency exit lighting, seat belts, all of these things that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis as safety professionals. And we honestly have to sometimes convince our employees to do these things, or our coworkers, or our teammates, right? And we get really, really sometimes wrapped up into this. And I have some folks on the staff, and to give you an idea, for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I have about 18 folks in the safety office that manage that program with a bunch of help. And we'll talk a little bit about where that help comes from, how we get employees involved, how we get supervisors involved. But it's really easy to get wrapped up in the day-to-day list here of things that have to be done to be safe and lose sight of how we really be safe. And I'm not saying these aren't valuable. They are extremely valuable, right? But they are also in many times in many ways based on individual performance. And as you look at safety, it really is about individual compliance in many ways as we've written those checklists, as we've written those procedures, right? I need the employees, the teammates, the coworkers to follow those things. We'll talk a little bit about how that works and maybe some other things we should be thinking about. How I see safety. Safety is a leadership and management issue coupled with individual responsibility, right? So if I tell you that you need to comply with the following list of restrictions for fall protection, right? That's an individual responsibility, but there's also leadership responsibility that goes into that, leadership and management, right? We have to provide the correct equipment. We have to provide the correct training. We have to provide the correct oversight and enforcement of rules. We'll talk some about that as we go through this and a little bit about my philosophy on how I think that should happen. So the Air Force has a safety framework, and this is worth just thinking about. In the Air Force, I am asked to do two things. My mission is to protect people from injury and occupational illness, and to preserve resources from damage through risk management. All right? And that's probably a little bit different mission set than maybe some of the other safety professionals are used to. All right? Because protecting people, we're pretty good at. Protecting resources may not be something that's within your job jar as a safety professional, but I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's important and why you should think about that. And then we have, you can see there are 4 pillars that go into that. It provides a framework, assurance, risk management, things of that nature. It provides a framework where I can use that to explain to leaders, managers, and employees how we get after safety in the Air Force. The other big thing is we have a risk management process, right? 5 steps about identifying hazards, assessing, developing controls, implementing controls, and supervise and evaluate. And these are laid out in our guidance on how to do safety, right? Our rules are based on OSHA's CFRs, Department of Labor's CFRs, things like that. But we have Air Force level guidance on how to implement and make that happen. That's one of the first things that I would suggest you should look at in your safety program. If you're just basing your entire safety program on the rules that are out there from OSHA or the CFRs, you're probably missing some leadership and management things that could go into that. And I would suggest that you write company policies, shop policies, things like that on how to implement these. That will help your employees to understand. It will also help your leaders and supervisors to understand what they should be doing. Some examples of that, on the Air Force side, we actually talk about how often supervisors should be looking at work centers and documenting any hazards they have and the process that they would use to report those, right? That fulfills some of those record-keeping requirements, for reporting of mishaps. We have procedures in place on how those get reported and how they get investigated. And that is an important framework, right, to help you with that safety program to make it more reliable, I guess is a good word. So the Air Force splits safety into several disciplines, right? We have aviation safety, occupational safety, space safety, systems safety, and weapons safety. And you're probably most familiar with occupational safety. That's the fall protection, hazardous energy control programs such as that. But imagine trying to apply those same rules to spacecraft, right? Imagine how we apply rules to explosive safety. System safety is one that I'm really going to touch on a couple of times. You saw the picture of the KC-135 refueling to B-52. That's a complex thing. That's a complex mission. That's a complex process. Airplanes are inherently dangerous because they occasionally fall out of the sky for any number of reasons. And all of the bits and pieces that go into making an airplane work have reliability challenges, right? Just like your car does. And honestly, if my car breaks down while I'm driving here, I pull over to the side of the road and it's all good. And I get some help. Less so with an airplane. Less so with a spacecraft, right? System safety looks at how all of those bits and pieces integrate and work together so that we don't have unforeseen hazards. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through, but there's an entire discipline of engineers within the Air Force that's all they do. Make sure that we don't introduce unknown hazards into complex systems in the design and sustainment process. Think about that if you work in an industrial area where you have complex machinery that does multiple things and you're getting a new piece of equipment. We'll talk a little bit more. We'll give a fairly basic example of that later on, but that's just an idea I want to leave with you as we go forward. The other thing is, I look at mishaps probably differently than you do. You're all familiar with the OSHA requirements on lost work days and hospitalizations and amputations and reporting things for that. The Department of Defense looks at mishaps in a slightly different light. We classify them by injury or by property damage. And they are broken into classes, class A, B, C, D, and E. All right? And you'll see that there's an injury definition on one side and there's a property damage definition on the other side. And the level of investigation, the scrutiny that it gets is based on whether it's a class A, B, C, D, or E. Now, that does lead to occasions where there may be a near miss or a really minor injury that has a really big hazard that doesn't get looked at as hard, and we have to be cognizant of that. But typically, we will bring in a team to look at those class A mishaps. And even if there wasn't an injury, if we destroy an aircraft or we have more than $2 million in damage and there were no injuries, it still gets a really hard look because that could easily bleed over, right? Could easily bleed over into injury, but also those assets are important to us. And generally the same risk management principles I'm using to prevent injury can also prevent property damage. And if I'm getting high levels of property damage, there's a good chance that I may have a risk management issue that needs to be discussed with leadership. And they probably care about that money, right? And oftentimes, we're going to talk about what does leadership care about, how do I relate to them. Dollar cost, bottom line, is a big way to do it. So oftentimes, if you're not making progress on a risk management area that you think could cause injury, but it is causing property damage, that's an avenue where you can get some traction. I also investigate off-duty mishaps of military members. And this is not something that you do, but it's something I want you to think about, right? because the Air Force hires, brings on a lot of type A, highly motivated, risk-taking hard chargers, right? You see fighter pilots, you see special ops guys, you see all these young men and women who are out there doing a really hard, risky job. And then I'm going to let them ride their motorcycles. And we see what happens with motorcycles in the civilian world, right? Regularly, we see automobile accidents. I have folks that have been places, I've been places where folks were highly involved in the rodeo, home construction, right? And what I talk to folks about is, you know, if I'm doing a one-of-a-kind mission and I'm the person that's going to make that happen, I will do a lot of planning in the execution of that mission to make sure that my aircraft survives, we get to the target, whatever it is, all right? Same thing with your folks. If you've got a highly specialized person that's doing a critical lift with a crane for a construction project, you're going to talk through that. But if that highly critical, one-of-a-kind person gets in an automobile accident on the way to work because they weren't being safe and they don't make it to work, that mission still doesn't happen, all right? So I have some abilities because of the way that the Air Force operates to investigate those off-duty mishaps and look for trends where folks maybe aren't working through risk management the way they should be, but also to send the message that, hey, we care about you on and off duty and we want you to be safe. Because how many times have you seen, let's just say, for example, construction, hey, here are the list of rules that I have to use on the job site, but maybe they don't apply to me at home because nobody's watching, right? We want to reinforce the idea that safety principles are true no matter where you're at. I want to protect you as an individual. You have value to me and the company. So I want you to be safe off duty as well as on duty. It's a slightly different mindset, but I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about how you might be able to at least convey that message to your employees, because if they feel valued, they are more likely to comply with the requirements of safety programs that we talked about earlier. And I also want to talk about what does it mean to be safe? And being safe varies. I used to tell, and I'll tell you here, a story about safe drivers. There's some studies out there that about 75% of American drivers think they are better than average at being safe. And that's not true, because only half of you can be better than average, not 70%. But the problem is we don't do a good job of defining what it means to be a good driver, just like we don't do a good job of defining what it means to be safe. You know, let's take, for example, my daughter who lives in Philadelphia and currently doesn't have a car. Takes the bus, takes the metro, takes an Uber, whatever. Is she a safe driver? She doesn't have a car. Perhaps she's extremely safe. Or perhaps she's not very safe when she does drive because she doesn't do it very often. Right? It depends on your definition. So we look at those two pictures of the folks with the helicopter, right, and then the guy on the other side that's parachuting. And we just had, it was interesting, you mentioned there's going to be a crane and sling class. We just did a hoist and sling class out at the Air Force Base. And one of the things we talked about was hoists and slings for personnel use. And my safety folks were like, I don't know when we'd ever do that. I said, well, we do it all the time, right? I've done it. I've got a lot of friends that have done it. I've got a friend whose life was saved after his airplane crashed because they hauled him up with a sling and a hoist on a helicopter out of the middle of nowhere. Think about slinging and hoisting people, right? Very risky. Think about the systems that go into that, making a helicopter and a sling and a hoist that's safe to lift a person. And we do that routinely, right? Would I want to do that if I was doing that at home with my hand lever hoist and a rope sling that I made myself because it looks like fun? Probably not the safest thing ever, because there's a lot that goes into making that low risk or lower risk. So think about what safe means within your organization. Think about how you want to define that, because we routinely tell folks to be safe. We say that safety is a topic. Leadership hits those buzzwords about, I want you to be safe this weekend. But I bet that means different things to different people, and we don't really understand what it means for our organization. I also want you to think about what is the mission, right? What is the mission? That particular truck was in northern Iraq when I was there, and we had a lot of conversations about what was the mission of that truck. What did it do? Come to find out, it was designed to, so on runways, when there's debris on the runway, and it gets sucked up into aircraft engines and weeds grow and all kinds of things. We have specialized sweepers, we have a variety of things to prevent that. In Iraq, they didn't have that. So they modified, they had an old jet engine that they modified on the back of this truck, and they would drive it up and down the runway and burn up all of that debris. It was effective. It worked for what they needed. That was the mission of that truck. But you wouldn't know that by looking at it. There are assumptions made about what the mission is of your company. One of the things I always tell my safety professionals is when you go to a unit, when you go someplace to inspect their safety program, understand what their mission is. Because their safety program should not impede that mission. Their safety program should contribute to the mission. And it should be a tool that they use to accomplish the mission in a timely manner with minimal loss of resources and injury to people. That's a much different mindset than we often see in safety. Many times I have people tell me, yeah, the safety office is just here to shut us down. And I may be there to shut you down because we haven't done a good job of helping you understand rules, helping you understand legal requirements. Maybe we've just got some folks out who aren't complying, and I need to send that message. But really, I should be helping you accomplish your mission. And my response whenever you want to do something new should be, okay, I think I understand what you're trying to do. Here are the things from a safety perspective that need to be put in place in order to do that. And sometimes you'll find that it's worth the cost as a leader and manager, and sometimes it's not. But that conversation, right, between leadership and management and safety is where that happens. And you're going to see a bottom line at the end of my slides if we get there, if we don't run out of time first. And what that will say is that, you know, what leadership and management training am I giving to my safety professionals? And what safety training am I giving to my leadership and management folks? Because until you do that, it's hard to relate safety and risk management to the mission. But we should be doing that every day. If you can answer this one, I think you're going to be ahead of the game, because what is the reward for being safe? And I talk about this regularly with supervisors. And the answer I get is, well, nobody got hurt today. We gave them a safety t-shirt, right? We gave them a safety magnet. We told them, and we do this all the time, we reward mission accomplishment. Hey, we met our production goals. We exceeded our production goals. We got the whatever fixed quicker than it needed to be. We got the bus back online in time to make its route. Okay, were we safe doing that? How often has anybody ever said, this is a story I love to use with supervisors, I'm driving home in the horrible weather, or I'm driving to work in the horrible weather, and it's hard to see, and somebody cuts me off on the road, and instead of giving them the universal sign for you're a lousy driver, I just kind of ease off a little bit, give some extra space, and I'm 10 minutes late getting to where I need to be. When's the last time anybody ever said to you, hey, I noticed you were 10 minutes late and the weather's horrible out there. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to be safe. Nobody ever says that, right? So what is the intrinsic motivation for the employees to be safe? I don't get yelled at. Nobody grouses at me about not wearing my fall protection harness incorrectly. What are you doing to reward safe behavior in your organization? I suspect that in a lot of places, safety is not a requirement on your annual appraisal or your quarterly appraisal or whatever it is. I've been some places where it is. Majority of companies I've talked to, that's not something that's graded in your performance. Maybe it should be. But that sends a message that perhaps safety isn't valued as much as some of the other things in our day-to-day job. And I'm not saying that safety needs to be a mandatory entry on your appraisal. That's one tool. But really, what is leadership and management doing to reward safe performance within an organization? Or is it all on you as the safety professionals to do that? Another indicator, whenever I look at a safety program, either within the Air Force or outside the Air Force, is who do safety professionals work for in your company? So the Air Force is structured in a way that we have in my organization. We have a wing commander or an installation commander and their staff. We have 4 subordinate commanders and 17 squadron commanders, all of whom have a safety program that I am responsible for overseeing. I work directly for the wing commander, which means that in safety matters, I have his or her authority. And it is clear to them, to all that leadership, that this is the commander's program and I am managing it on their behalf. All right? And there are particular decisions about safety that I will not make because I'm an advisor. And I talk to that commander about those things. Those subordinate commanders all have someone working as an additional duty, an employee, for lack of a better term, who helps them with their safety program. And that employee may not work for that particular commander day to day in their normal duties, but for safety, that's who they report to. And that's who they talk to. And I talk to those commanders and those safety representatives. That's an important thing to think about, right? Because first of all, it gets employee involvement, but second of all, it is not my program as the safety leader, right? I oversee it, I manage it, but it is a commander's program. It is a leader and manager's program, right? That's where the authority comes from. And we're going to talk just a little bit more about that as we go through here. Who do you work for in your company, right? I've talked to some places where, hey, oh, you're the safety guy, right? Tell me about what's going on. They're like, yeah, we just got to the point where we need an organized safety program. For the last 10 years, I've been HR. And since safety involves people, they gave me the safety program as an additional duty within my HR realm. Sometimes it's done with security under the terms of public safety, right? But many organizations don't have a full-time safety professional. It's an additional duty, and maybe they are buried 4 or 5 layers deep within that organization. That becomes an authority issue, because then you are not speaking on behalf of that senior leader, senior manager. Not saying you have to change it, but I want you to keep that in mind and think about how that may affect the implementation of your safety program. Enforcement. Borrowed this picture from the Martha's Vineyard Times. If you see pictures that don't have a caption on them, those are either Air Force public use photos or my own. The ones I've borrowed from other places I gave credit to. So this is up in Martha's Vineyard. And I can tell you all day long that the speed limit around that corner is 45 because it's a blind corner. There could be deer, there could be kids, there could be any sorts of things up there. And you will go around that corner somewhere between 50 and 65, depending on how much risk you're willing to take. If I tell you that the Martha's Vineyard Elite Police Enforcement Unit is around that corner writing tickets, you will go 45. It's just how it is, right? And we see that in all kinds of safety programs. What I want you to think about is the idea that enforcement matters in safety, but who should do it? Right? One of the things I try to avoid as a safety professional is enforcement. I will remind people of rules. I will tell them when they're not complying, but I will leave enforcement to the leadership and management. Several months ago, I had some folks in our building in the safety office doing some maintenance who were standing on the top of a folding ladder. Apparently, they didn't know that it was the safety office. And it just so happened that their management, 3 levels up from where they were, also worked in that building. So I did 2 things. First, I took a picture and I told them, you need to get down and come with me. And I took them into that particular senior leader's office with my picture and said, this is what your folks are doing, and they know it's not okay, and so do you. And I let them handle it. And the interesting thing was their immediate supervisors came back with, who in the world takes those kind of pictures? But enforcement shouldn't be done always by safety, because that sends a message that only safety cares about safety rules, right? When I worked aircraft maintenance, when I worked munitions, when our security forces folks, they all have a standardization evaluation or a QA program, right? So if I'm flying a check ride in my airplane, I'm flying with an evaluator, and there is a detected safety violation, I am automatically unqualified. And safety gets notified that it happened, but it didn't require any action from the safety office other than to document it. It was all handled through leadership and management. Same thing with QA, right? If I'm performing a maintenance task and I don't follow the safety protocols that are outlined within that technical order or within those directions, I'm automatically Q3 or unqualified for a detected safety violation, and I have to actually be retrained. And it's documented in my training folder. That's a significantly different way of looking at safety than, hey, safety is responsible for enforcement. If you can get other people to understand that safety is important and enforce those rules for you, it makes your program go so much better. And I would recommend that you talk with your leadership about how you can do that. Another one is employee involvement. These folks are using a 10,000-pound capability fork truck to load a very large container into the back of a very expensive Air Force aircraft. I used to have folks that did that at night on NVGs with the engines running on the airplane. All right? Risky business. High potential there for an accident. Right? If employees aren't involved and don't understand the risks and the safety protocols and aren't empowered to call knock it off, we're going to break something. We're going to hurt somebody. Right? And you can get employee involvement at all levels of your safety program. I talked about the idea that, you know, I have a limited number of safety professionals on my team, but I get employees involved in other places. That's important. It helps them understand the safety rules. It gives them ownership of the program, but more importantly, they are able to interpret with the mission, right? And one of the things I talk about is safety professionals don't always fully understand the mission of the task at hand or the intricacies of the task at hand, and they need help with the conversation. So I watched them out my window, well, I don't have a window, watched them out the back door paint some water towers the other day. And these nice folks climbed up the center of the water tower, they got out the top, they threw some stanchions over the side, they slid over the edge on ropes, they put a giant sock on it, they bead blasted it, and then they painted it. I don't have anybody in my safety office that has ever done that and painted a water tower, right? I can talk about fall protection, I can talk about respirators, I can talk about hazards from paint. I don't have anyone that's ever slid down the side of a rope and painted a water tower. So there's some challenges there that we may not fully understand. So that conversation needs to happen about how can we do this effectively while still complying with the safety requirements. That's where employee involvement comes in. The other thing is employees are great at identifying hazards. They will tell you all day about them. Some of them are valid and some are not. That's okay, right? Whatever they tell you, please thank them. Appreciate their input, explain to them why it was or was not valid, but don't belittle the input, no matter what it is. Because as soon as you do that, they're going to stop. The other side of that is sometimes we want to put incentives on safety achievements, right? Not the thank you, but maybe we tie no lost duty days to, or no lost time injuries over a particular period to a bonus for someone. Right? Or a bonus for a group of folks. That can be valuable. Just be careful that that doesn't also inhibit reporting of things that you should know about. Right? Employee involvement goes a long ways when used correctly. Supervisors. Every supervisor in the Air Force gets a 4-hour training course. Every one of them. And it's standard courseware that's then modified slightly for the location we're at. And we talk to supervisors about, hey, I expect you to be going through your work center and identifying hazards. Here's how often the Air Force expects you to do that. Here's how I expect you to document it. By the way, supervisors are responsible for reporting on-the-job mishaps. Here's how you do that. Here are the requirements, and here's where they're based on. Here's who helps you with those things within your office. All right? Every supervisor should get some level of safety training because the responsibilities to the safety program are different for leaders, managers, and supervisors than they are for line employees. If you don't have specialized training for your supervisors, I would think about that. You can make a lot of money with your safety program. You can prevent a lot of mishaps by showing them how to be involved. Because honestly, you know, in the Air Force, we teach folks to take risks and to do good things. People will assume risks and do hazardous activities because they think their supervisor will tell them to, and they think the supervisor is too busy to ask for permission. Many times, the supervisor would come back and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we could do this instead. There are tools available to supervisors that line employees don't always know about. Help them be involved in that conversation. Help them understand what their roles and responsibilities are within the safety program. Think about what leadership values when you approach them on their safety program. We often put safety in terms of lost time because it's easy for the leadership and management to understand, right? I know how much I pay employees, and if so-and-so got hurt and they weren't in the office for 10 hours or on the job site for 10 hours and I was paying them workers' compensation instead, I've lost this much value because of this mishap, right? But that's not always a good indicator of safety. This BBC News photo is of Piper Alpha, which is an oil drilling platform that had a huge fire out in the North Atlantic. If you read through the case study on this, it's a very interesting set of mishaps. A variety of things went wrong. It is definitely a systems problem on how things interacted. But the really interesting thing, and it's just kind of a side note, it may not be more than an anecdote, but it's interesting to note that the company leadership was on the oil drilling platform when the events leading up to the accident happened, giving out safety awards for not having lost time injuries. But they were doing this really, really complex operation that had some inherent hazards, and it wasn't going well. And the right folks were there to talk to about it, but they didn't want to bother them, right? Because they were doing this other thing, and they didn't want it to be seen in front of these other managers. So it wasn't pointed out, and those right folks didn't get involved. Think about that within your office, within your company. What is your leadership value, and how do you relate safety to that? And then we get a lot of safety costs. How much? Right? This is a picture of a Navy salvage ship. There are several of them out there. It's picking up things off the bottom of the ocean because that's what salvage ships do. I was down in Zambia helping them with their safety program. And prior to that, I had worked at an aircraft accident crash for the Air Force where we had lost an airplane and a pilot, unfortunately. And the debris was on the bottom of the ocean somewhere in the world. And we needed to figure out what happened. So we essentially hired a salvage ship. The Air Force told me how much money I could spend. We converted that into how long I could keep the ship. And we pulled stuff off the bottom of the ocean so that we could conduct the mishap investigation with a full team of people. The interesting thing to me was when I was talking to the partner Air Force, I realized I had spent, or the Air Force had spent more money pulling this airplane off the bottom of the ocean for good reason than the budget of the Air Force for the year that I was talking to, the partner nation Air Force. That's an important thing to think about because someone's going to ask you, we're spending how much on safety? I've been talking with someone downtown who asked me, hey, I need to get an occupancy permit for this business I'm planning to open. The building hasn't been used in 10 years. What things do we need to do for an occupancy permit? And that's relatively straightforward, right? You go to the county website for where they're at. It tells they need a fire inspection, they need a variety of things. Here's kind of what they're going to look for on the fire inspection. By the way, your fire extinguishers haven't been looked at in 10 years because nobody's been in the building. Your emergency exit lighting, All those things need to be looked at. Well, how do I do that? Well, you can hire a company to do it. You're going to need to get your extinguishers probably hydrostatically tested or swapped out because, it's been 10 years, just some things like that. His response was, that sounds really expensive. I said, well, it is, but so is the violation that comes from OSHA. So is, right? We get caught up in the upfront costs of safety sometimes, the upfront cost of PPE, and the employees aren't caring for their things. Right? Those are valid concerns. But how do I relate and how do I explain the value of safety versus the outlay for it to my leadership and management? That goes back to what do they value and what is their mission? And that's a tough conversation sometimes. Look at creative ways to do that. Look at ways to help them understand. And you're going to see at the end, I'm going to talk again about safety education for leaders and managers and management and leadership education for safety professionals. The more you do that on both sides, the easier that conversation will be. Because one of the things I've found is the things that go into good management, right? Friction points, rework costs, things like that, really are safety things under different terminology, right? I can relate a mishap to rework costs because I have to do those things again, right? I can relate, if I see friction points in production, that's probably a place where we're taking risk because it's already a stressor and we're trying to really hard make that mission happen. So that might be a place where leadership and management may turn a blind eye to some safety practices. And that may be a place where I have a high potential for a mishap. So if I have a critical machine that I need for this production and it's going to cause production to go down, that may be a place where I may, as a leader or manager, choose to take some risk and not tell anyone. That's important to know from a safety perspective so that I can intervene and help where needed. This is always an interesting one. Who owns the problem? And if you can answer this, if you can answer who owns the problem, you've got a good handle on your safety program. All right, because here we are, I've got a trip hazard out there on the entryway somewhere. And but I don't know who owns that. I know it's a problem. Someone told me. And by the way, someone put an orange cone out there, and they probably are really proud of themselves because they did a safety thing. And that's how it's going to be. And that orange cone is going to be there for the next 3 years until it blows away in a storm, and then someone's going to do a good deed and put it back. But how do I get that fixed? Who owns the sidewalk? How do I pay for it? What do you mean I have to pay for fixing the sidewalk? Right? And then Joe slipped in it, or Maggie slipped on the ice from the puddle that built up there. Who owns the problem? See that all the time, right? Someone comes and tells me, hey, I've got a safety issue here in the building. Got it. There's a good chance that I'm not going to fix that as the safety professional. I'm going to go find a leader or manager and go, hey, this problem was identified. Here's some things that I need you to do, but I don't have a budget to fix buildings, right? I don't have a budget to repair sidewalks. I have to find someone that can do those things. There's a lack of ownership quite often in safety because they want it to be my problem and they want me to fix it. And I don't have the capacity to do that, right? Those are leadership and management problems, most likely. When you can get leadership and management and the employees to own the problem, you've gone a long way. And here's a good example. I was touring a facility once. The facility does a lot of things that involve water. They move heavy objects, they move a lot of things, but there's water running everywhere through pipes to machines and things like that. And one of the things that they did was they showed me a water puddle, and they said anytime that we find a water puddle, a couple of things happen. Number one, if I'm the employee that created it, I just own it, right? I make sure that everybody knows, we get the right people to clean it up, and it's a priority. If I discover a water puddle and I didn't create it, it's just there, we log it as a near miss because one of two things has happened. Either someone spilled something and didn't clean it up, or I have an equipment problem that leaked and I didn't know about it. And I want to be able to fix that because everything we do involves water and everything we do is hazardous. So the leak is important, right? And not knowing where it came from or how it got there tells me that I have a gap somewhere within my programs. That's understanding the mission of the organization, and that's understanding what leadership values. And that was a really interesting way to look at near misses. Not appropriate everywhere, but think about entryways, right? Entryways that get wet in inclement weather. Businesses, stores are really good about keeping those clean, as are hospitals. Has to do with insurance things. But if you don't own the entryway, if you're not worried about your insurance for the customer, if you are just a business downtown where people come and go, who owns the entryway and who's responsible for cleaning it up during foul weather? Is it the custodians? How often do they come? Do we have debris building up, water, salt, whatever in that entryway that sits there for several days and creates a hazard? Those are simple things to fix, but if no one owns that problem from leadership and management, it just sits there. So think about who owns the problem and how do I get folks to own the problem? Think about second and third order consequences. Remember I talked earlier about systems and how things interact? Oftentimes, and safety should be involved when new processes, procedures, equipment are brought into the company. And why is that? Has to do with this picture, ABC News picture that was up north. What they were doing was they were changing out the lights in their traffic signals. Right? They were going from incandescent bulbs to LEDs, which makes sense. Great idea to do it. City council came and said we should do this, we'll save a lot of money. Right? They're low voltage, they're low wattage, they last forever. Awesome things. So they did. All through the city one summer. What they didn't understand when they made this decision, but a good systems engineer would have looked at, is the reason that they are low energy is their spectrum is very narrow and they don't produce heat, right? No energy is wasted producing heat. So it snowed and the lights filled with snow and it didn't melt until it warmed up and the sun came out, because the LEDs don't produce heat. The incandescent bulbs produced heat and melted it. Nobody understood that. A good engineer would have, if we'd have talked through this, but why would I need to talk to them about this decision? So they had to go through and actually retrofit all of their traffic lights with heaters to melt the snow. All right? Not sure how much of an advantage now I have in my cost savings after I've done that, but it's an interesting thing to think about. Similarly, we had several airports where we changed the airport lighting from incandescent bulbs to LED bulbs for all the right reasons. What we found was life flight pilots that fly often on NVGs at night couldn't see those lights on their NVGs because they don't produce the IR energy that the incandescent bulbs did. So they actually had to go back and retrofit and put in IR LEDs also in those areas. Second and third order consequences of good leadership and management decisions, cost savings, sustainability and things like that, those are systems conversations. And that's where a little bit of understanding of how systems interact and operate can really make you some money in a safety program. We do a lot of that in the Air Force because of the complex nature of our weapon systems. All right, I think this is the last one before we get to the wrap-up, but I always give this traffic safety example. And it's interesting, I've given this traffic safety example for a number of years now. And it has to do with perspective, and it has to do with conversation. So the blue block is a car, and this has to do with why pedestrians get hit at intersections, or why motorcycles get hit, or why bicyclists get hit. And let's just say, for the sake of example, that that's a stop sign for the blue car and the cross traffic that's going left and right does not stop. And let's say that maybe I am running up the left side of that road on the sidewalk because I'm a good safety professional, I don't want to get hit. And I come running up to that intersection just as that car pulls up to the stop sign. And there's a crosswalk there. So we get there, and I always know that drivers aren't always looking very hard for people. So I look to see if the driver sees me, and the driver's looking at me, and I step into that intersection and start to cross the road, and the driver goes and hits me. Or I'm you know, on my bicycle and a driver hits me, or motorcycle, a driver hits me. And we start to do the investigation on what happened, right? And the driver says, hey, man, I got to this intersection and looked and didn't see anything and went, and all of a sudden there was this jogger in front of me and I don't know where he came from and he got hit. And he's telling the truth, even though me as the runner says, okay, joggers are people that's slower than me. And by the way, you looked right at me because I looked at you because I know how drivers are, and you hit me anyway, right? Both of those are true perspectives. And what happens is we are conditioned to do particular things as drivers, right? Driving is very complex. It involves a lot of mental work. So I come up to that intersection and I'm looking left, right, left. And when I came to the intersection, I didn't really notice anything around me. And I'm looking out in the distance at the speed that's appropriate for vehicles that are approaching. And this runner is coming at the wrong speed and they're the wrong size, so I'm not looking for them and I don't see them. Not because I don't want to, because I don't want to hit someone. It's just not in my nature because I've conditioned myself not to do that. All right? And I've conditioned myself as a runner to look at the driver to make sure he's looking at me because I know that they often ignore me. It still happens. I told that story for about 5 years, and then I was hit in an intersection exactly the same way as I just described, right, while I was out running. So even though we understand the psychology of how mishaps occur and we try to be vigilant, we still have gaps sometimes in our judgment. I want you to think about that when you're working through your safety program. I want you to think about where people really are trying to do the right thing, but maybe they're just a little bit tired, or maybe they're not thinking exactly the way they should, or maybe I let my guard down. Because it could have just as easily been me that was driving that car as opposed to running, right? And it could have been a bad day for me and I didn't see the runner. So think through that. But I've used that example for years and it actually happened to me. You probably have similar experiences within your own safety program. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up with two questions I want you to think about as I went through these safety-specific examples and a little bit about myself. What things are you doing to equip your leaders and managers with safety skills? How are you targeting them specifically? Or are you just looking at employees and compliance on that list of things that I saw earlier? Are you helping leaders and managers to understand risk and how to manage it? And then, what leadership and management training are you being offered as a safety professional? Outside of your continuing education for safety, what skills are you learning about friction points, about value-added manufacturing and things like that, about the mission of your company? Because those will make you better at your safety job and they will make you better able to relate to the leaders and managers. Okay, and I appreciate everyone coming out. I hope everyone has a good afternoon, good morning. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful day. And thank you again so much to the Chamber for allowing me to come and address you guys today.